Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Friday, June 27th, 2025. Supreme Court rules that individual judges do not have the power to block a president's policies across the country, known as nationwide injunctions. The underlying case, whose merits have not been decided yet, involves President Donald Trump's executive order restricting birthright citizenship. President Trump calls the decision on injunctions a monumental victory for the Constitution and said he will promptly file to push other policies that courts have blocked. Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer calls it a terrifying step towards authoritarianism. Supreme Court also handing down other closely watched decisions today, including in favor of parents in Maryland who want to have their children opt out of a curriculum with LGBTQ books, and upholding a Texas law requiring age verification for adult websites. Senate Republicans look to have their first vote on the Tax Cut and Spending Cut budget reconciliation bill, known as the One Big Beautiful Bill, on Saturday. House members get a classified briefing on the U.S. bombing of Iranian nuclear sites. The foreign ministers of Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo meet in Washington to sign a peace agreement brokered by the White House. And Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin, a Republican, will talk about this year's Virginia governor election between Republican Lieutenant Governor Winsome Earle-Sears and Democratic Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger. CBS News writes the Supreme Court on Friday limited the use of nationwide injunctions, reining in federal judges' ability to issue sweeping orders that have in recent years stymied implementation of policies from Republican and Democratic presidential administrations alike. In a widely anticipated decision stemming from President Trump's executive orders seeking to end birthright citizenship, the High Court said that universal orders likely exceed the equitable authority that Congress has granted to the federal courts. Justice Amy Coney Barrett authored the majority opinion for the 6-3 court, with the liberal justices in dissent. Reporting from CBS News, President Donald Trump praised the decision in a White House news conference.
Well, this was a big one, wasn't it? This was a big decision. An amazing decision, one that we're very happy about. This morning, the Supreme Court has delivered a monumental victory for the Constitution, the separation of powers, and the rule of law, in striking down the excessive use of nationwide injunctions to interfere with the normal functioning of the executive branch. The Supreme Court has stopped the presidency itself. That's what they've done. And really, it's been an amazing period of time this last hour. There are people elated all over the country. I've seen such happiness and spirit. Sometimes you don't see that, but this case is very important. I was elected on a historic mandate, but in recent months we've seen a handful of radical left judges effectively try to overrule the rightful powers of the president to stop the American people from getting the policies that they voted for in record numbers. It was a grave threat to democracy, frankly, and instead of merely ruling on the immediate cases before them, these judges have attempted to dictate the law for the entire nation. In practice, this meant that if any one of the nearly 700 federal judges disagreed with the policy of a duly elected president of the United States, he or she could block that policy from going into effect, or at least delay it for many years, tie it up in the court system. This was a colossal abuse of power which never occurred in American history prior to recent decades. And we've been hit with more nationwide injunctions than were issued in the entire 20th century together. Think of it, more than the entire 20th century, me. I'm grateful to the Supreme Court for stepping in and solving this very, very big and complex problem, and they've made it very simple. I want to thank Justice Barrett, who wrote the opinion brilliantly, as well as Chief Justice Roberts, and Justices Alito, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Thomas. Great people. Thanks for this decision, and thanks to this decision, we can now promptly file to proceed with numerous policies that have been wrongly enjoined on a nationwide basis. And some of the cases we're talking about would be ending birthright citizenship, which now comes to the fore. That was meant for the babies of slaves. It wasn't meant for people trying to scam the system and come into the country on a vacation. This was, in fact, it was the same date, the exact same date, the end of the Civil War. It was meant for the babies of slaves, and it's so clean and so obvious. But This lets us go there and finally win that case, because hundreds of thousands of people are pouring into our country under birthright citizenship, and it wasn't meant for that reason. It was meant for the babies of slaves. So thanks to this decision, we can now promptly file to proceed with these numerous policies and those that have been wrongly enjoined on a nationwide basis, including birthright citizenship, ending sanctuary city funding, suspending refugee resettlement, freezing unnecessary funding, stopping federal taxpayers from paying for transgender surgeries, and numerous other priorities of the American people. We have so many of them. I have a whole list. I'm not going to bore you, and I'm going to have Pam get up and say a few words, but there's really, she can talk as long as she wants, because this is a very important decision. This is a decision that covers a tremendous amount of territory. But I want to just thank again the Supreme Court for this ruling. It's a giant. It's a giant. And they should be very proud, and our country should be very proud of the Supreme Court today.
President Donald Trump opening up a news conference in the White House briefing room, referring to Attorney General Pam Bondi, who was there, along with the Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche. New York Times writing about this decision: before, more than 1,000 judges had the power to issue nationwide orders that could stop the federal government in its tracks. Now those judges' rulings can only apply to the actual plaintiffs in the case. Part of the decision, Justice Amy Coney Barrett, writing from the majority, writes, some say that the universal injunction gives the judiciary a powerful tool to check the executive branch, but federal courts do not exercise general oversight of the executive branch. They resolve cases and controversies consistent with the authority Congress has given them. When a court concludes that the executive branch has acted unlawfully, the answer is not for the court to exceed its power too. Justice Sonia Sotomayor, writing for the dissent, talking about the decision to pursue the case via nationwide injunctions and not on the merits of the president's executive order on birthright citizenship. Justice Sotomayor says that's unconstitutional, and she writes, the gamesmanship in this request is apparent, and the government makes no attempt to hide it, yet shamefully this court plays along. Justice Sotomayor also writing, today the threat is to birthright citizenship. Tomorrow, a different administration may try to seize firearms from law-abiding citizens or prevent people of certain faiths from gathering to worship. And Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, in a separate dissent, talking about the injunctions, it is important to recognize that the executive's bid to vanquish so-called universal injunctions is at bottom a request for this court's permission to engage in unlawful behavior. When the government says, do not allow the lower courts to enjoin executive action universally as a remedy for unconstitutional conduct, what it is actually saying is that the executive wants to continue doing something that a court has determined violates the Constitution. Please allow this. This is some solicitation. That was from Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson in the decision issued today. More reaction from the Democratic side. Connecticut Attorney General William Tong held a news conference in Hartford.
Birthright citizenship and the 14th Amendment is and remains the law of the land right now. In the injunction that we, the state, secured for Connecticut, Massachusetts, New York, all the states in our coalition, the injunction remains in place. And in fact, birthright citizenship remains the law of the land, and the 14th Amendment continues to operate the way it has always operated. For everyone, everywhere, for the next 30 days. And so there's been considerable reporting and some confusion about what this means. This doesn't mean the president is right. This doesn't mean that the court has found that he can amend the Constitution with a stroke of a pen and abolish birthright citizenship or fundamentally change or overturn the 14th Amendment. It does not mean that at all. And in fact, Justice Barrett was very clear in her majority decision to say quite clearly, they don't often do this, but she was very explicit that they were not addressing the merits of the case, meaning they expressed no opinion on whether the president's executive order to ban or eliminate birthright citizenship was lawful or unlawful, constitutional or unconstitutional, because it's not lawful and it's not constitutional. But this was a technical decision about nationwide injunctions. What the court did say is that for private parties Okay, if you go to court and you seek to vindicate your rights, in this case, to your citizenship based on your birth on American soil, you can get an injunction. And so for the private parties in front of the court who sued, their injunction remains in place. But it doesn't apply to everybody else similarly situated. The second question, which is whether states can go in and get nationwide injunctions, the Supreme Court totally punted on that question, completely. And in fact, Justice Barrett says, we know the states make the argument that they're different, and we get that there's some arguments there. We're not going to deal with those today. We're going to send those down to the lower courts to fashion an injunction that makes sense. That's basically what they said. So the question about whether states can get nationwide injunctions that apply to other states remains open. And we expect to prevail on that. We'll go back down to federal court in Massachusetts and in Washington state. And we expect that it will be clear that states are different and that states can get nationwide injunctions.
Connecticut Attorney General William Tong, a Democrat, holding a news conference today in Hartford on the Supreme Court's decision today. Vice President J.D. Vance writing on X, a huge ruling by the Supreme Court smacking down the ridiculous process of nationwide injunctions. Under our system, everyone has to follow the law, including judges. Senator Chris Coons, Democrat of Delaware, writing on X, today SCOTUS made clear that one branch of our government, the executive, has free rein to do what it wishes without meaningful checks or review. The court's ruling will only embolden Trump and his dismantling of our federal government. It will create an unworkable patchwork of laws that shift depending on who you are or what state you're in. The president's executive order, at the heart of the decision, narrows birthright citizenship in the Constitution's 14th Amendment, which is currently interpreted by the courts to mean that anyone born in the U.S., in U.S. territory, is a citizen, no matter the immigration status of their parents. Back to today's White House briefing, Attorney General Pam Bondi was asked how, if the president's order stands, this would be enforced.
Under birthright citizenship, if this is implemented, who would be tasked with actually vetting citizenship? And how, would this be a situation where you have nurses and doctors checking for citizenship of parents? Or?
This is all pending litigation. It's going to be decided in October by the Supreme Court, and we'll discuss that after the litigation.
If you have an undocumented baby, would that baby then be an enforcement priority?
The violent criminals in our country are the priority now. Let me put it in perspective. Today marked the 2,711th arrest in our country of TDA members, just TDA. Everyone in this room agrees they are one of the most violent criminal organizations in the world. And the Biden administration let them walk into our country for the last 4 years. 2,711 of them today have been arrested in our country. That is the priority of Donald Trump. That is the priority of this country, of Homeland Security, of all of our lawyers, of FBI. That's the priority. That will be discussed in October when the Supreme Court hopefully rules in our favor, and we're very confident of that. But you should all feel safer now that President Trump can deport all of these gangs, and not one district court judge can think they're an emperor over this administration and his executive powers and why the people of the United States elected him.
Attorney General Pam Bondi at today's White House briefing, which included President Donald Trump and the Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche. New York Times writing that challenges to the birthright citizenship order are pending in appeals courts, and the Trump administration has told the Supreme Court that it would seek review before the justices should it lose. But there is no pending case on the merits of Trump's executive order at the Supreme Court. It is likely but hardly certain then that the court will decide the issue in the term that starts in October, as Bondi has repeatedly promised in the news conference. That was from the New York Times. This is Washington today. There were 4 more Supreme Court decisions on this final day of issuing decisions for the current term. This is how Associated Press writes it. The Supreme Court preserved a key part of the Affordable Care Act's preventive health care coverage requirements on Friday, rejecting a challenge from Christian employers to the provision that affects some 150 million Americans. The 6-3 ruling comes in a lawsuit over how the government decided which health care medications and services must be fully covered by private insurance. under former President Barack Obama's signature law, often referred to as Obamacare. Supreme Court on Friday upheld the fee that is added to phone bills to provide billions of dollars a year in subsidized phone and internet services in schools, libraries, and rural areas. That was also 6-3. And the Supreme Court on Friday upheld a Texas law aimed at blocking children from under 18 from seeing online pornography. Nearly half of all states have passed similar age verification laws as smartphones and other devices make it easier to access online porn, including hardcore obscene material. The 6-3 ruling comes after an adult entertainment industry trade group called the Free Speech Coalition challenged the Texas law. This is all from AP. And the next case, a Supreme Court ruled on Friday that Maryland parents who have religious objections can pull their children from public school lessons using LGBTQ plus storybooks. Education Secretary Linda McMahon posted a video about that decision.
The Supreme Court ruling in Mahmoud versus Taylor is not only a win for religious liberty, but parental rights. Parents have the right to know what their children are learning at school and to exercise their First Amendment freedom of religion to opt out of divisive and ideological lessons that go against their family's values and beliefs. The court rightfully held that schools cannot shut parents out or disregard their religious obligations to their children. We are proud to see families, not bureaucrats, reclaiming their role in raising their children according to their sincerely held religious beliefs.
Education Secretary Linda McMahon in a video. Congressman Jamie Raskin, Democrat from Maryland, was on CNN today talking about this Supreme Court decision on LGBTQ plus curriculum involving parents from his state.
As the dissenting opinions point out here, the implications of this decision are just breathtaking because, of course, if you have a religious free exercise right to opt out of a compulsory exercise, for example, what the Supreme Court said in West Virginia versus Barnett, it applies not just to an exercise of religious conscience, but a conscience generally. If there are, Jehovah's Witness kids who don't want to participate in the compulsory flag salute, it also applies to kids who are internationalists or pacifists or what have you. And it's the same thing here. If you can opt out of mandatory classroom readings, because it offends your religious objections. You can do it because it offends your philosophical, beliefs, your political beliefs, your moral beliefs, or what have you. And the court basically says, well, we'll deal with all of that down the road. There's going to be a lot more cases where people are saying, our family doesn't believe in evolution, so we don't want our kid to be in class when evolution is taught. It offends our religion. Our family doesn't believe in war, so we don't want our kids in class when World War II is being taught about. And so the courts are going to have to figure that out. And so again, they're trying to flatter a particular political group, a MAGA group here, and I think it's going to cause chaos going forward in terms of trying to figure out what it means to have a public education system.
Congressman Jamie Raskin, Democrat of Maryland, today on CNN on the Supreme Court decision. There was another Supreme Court ruling anticipated, but it's been put off. Democracy docket writes, in a surprise move, the court postponed until next term a decision in a high-stakes Louisiana redistricting case that could have major implications for the future of the Voting Rights Act. The move suggests the majority may want to make a sweeping ruling that could significantly weaken what's left of the VRA's power to stop racial discrimination in voting. That's how Democracy Docket put it. And this is Washington Today. Story from the Hill. The Senate Majority Leader John Thune told Senate Republicans to expect to see the legislative text of the budget reconciliation package on Friday evening and then to vote at noon Saturday to begin debate on President Trump's tax and spending bill. Thune gave GOP senators the updated schedule after they met with Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent to discuss a tentative deal between the White House and House Republicans from New York, New Jersey, and California to raise the cap on state and local tax SALT deductions from $10,000 to $40,000 for a period of 5 years. But Thune acknowledged after the meeting that the schedule could slip, calling the Saturday vote aspirational. That was from the Hill. The Senate Majority Leader John Thune also spoke on the Senate floor about this bill.
Mr. President, last November, the American people elected President Trump and a Republican Congress with a clear mandate. And since taking control in Washington this year, we've been working to deliver on our promise of a safer, stronger, and more prosperous America. Now we have the opportunity to pass a bill that advances all of these priorities and sets our country up for better days ahead. We've worked hard on this, and now it's time to deliver. Mr. President, the centerpiece of our bill is permanent tax relief for the American people. The 2017 Republican-led tax cuts lowered rates for every income bracket. We doubled the child tax credit and nearly doubled the standard deduction. But those policies will expire at the end of the year without action from Congress, which means a typical family would be hit with a $1,700 tax hike next year. In my state of South Dakota, South Dakotans would see their taxes go up on average $2,500. We're determined not to let that happen. Not next year, not ever. Our bill makes the 2017 lower tax rates permanent. It raises the child tax credit to $2,200 per child and links it to inflation permanently. And it maintains the higher standard deduction that 90% of taxpayers use. And, Mr. President, we're not stopping there. Seniors will have an even higher standard deduction. Millions of tipped workers will benefit from no tax on tips. And millions of hourly workers will be able to keep more of their overtime pay with no tax on overtime. Mr. President, passing this bill means smaller tax bills and bigger paychecks for the American people permanently. It will also help get our economy firing on all cylinders again. In 2017, we boosted our economy by lifting the tax burden on American businesses. We lowered tax rates for the owners of small and medium-sized businesses, farms, and ranches. We made it easier for them to recover the cost of investing in their businesses, which in turn freed up cash for them to invest in their operations and their workers. These and other major reforms helped kickstart our economy. And now we have the opportunity to make all of the pro-growth reforms from 2017 permanent and go even further. Our bill makes the small business deduction permanent. Full expensing for new equipment and domestic R&D will be permanent. Full expensing for new factories and factory improvements will generate growth and job creation, encourage more goods to be made in America. A higher death tax threshold that's linked to inflation will spare countless family farms, ranches, and small businesses from a potentially devastating tax and the cost of burdensome planning. And the next generation will be able to access new investment accounts when they reach adulthood to use for education, to start a business, to buy their first home, essentially, Mr. President, to get a running start on the American dream. All of this means more money in Americans' pockets, more opportunity, and greater prosperity.
Senate Majority Leader John Thune, Republican from South Dakota, on the Senate floor. He also spoke about spending cuts in the budget reconciliation bill.
Mr. President, there's a lot more I could say about this bill. But before I close, I just want to talk about how this bill delivers on Republicans' promise to rein in the size of government. Deliver savings to the American people by reining in waste, fraud, and abuse in federal programs. It includes the largest spending cut in American history, as well as common sense, good government reforms that haven't been attempted in Washington, D.C. in decades. And with more revenue we get, Mr. President, by growing the economy, not by raising taxes, this bill will actually help reduce the deficit by as much as $6 trillion. Mr. President, this bill delivers on the mandate the American people gave Republicans last year. A stronger America, a safer America, and a more prosperous America. It's right around the corner.
Senate Majority Leader John Thune on the Senate floor. The Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, gave the Democratic perspective on the Republican bill at a news conference.
Everyone knows this Republican bill is a big mess. But now we're hearing chatter they might try to rush it to the floor as soon as tomorrow. So let's be absolutely clear. This bill is deeply flawed. It's devastating for American families. It rips health care from 16 million people. It has the biggest cuts to food funding ever, losing over 2 million jobs, and that might go up because we hear they may make worse the clean energy provisions, even worse. Biggest cuts to food funding ever. And instead of fixing the egregious provisions of the bill, they're trying to jam it through. They don't want the American people to find out what's in it. The more and more that Americans look at the bill, the less they like it. The more they despise it, Quinnipiac said, here are the polling data. Quinnipiac, 53% against, only 27% support. Fox News, 59 against, 38% support. Kaiser Family Foundation, 64% against, only 35% support. And you'll notice in these numbers, the American people are learning more and more about this bill, I think in good part because of the action that Senate Dems have taken. We have been relentless in letting people know how bad it is. And now they know. Of course Americans hate this bill. It steals their Medicaid. It jacks up their premiums. It takes away their jobs and gives trillions away to billionaires and special interests. So, of course, Republicans are scrambling and rushing. They know their bill is terrible. They don't want the American people to see what's in it. Republican leaders probably don't even want their members to know what's in the bill, or else it'll never get done. There's no good reason for Republicans to chase a silly deadline. None. Even Donald Trump 2 hours ago admitted the July 4th deadline's a fake, and yet here they are, rushing to meet an artificial deadline even though they know their bill is deeply flawed and harmful to their constituencies and their own politics.
Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, at a news conference, and The Hill has an article. President Trump said Friday the July 4th deadline he set for Congress to pass his big, beautiful bill could have some wiggle room, backing off of pressure on Republicans. Trump said about the deadline during a press conference at the White House, it's important. It's not the end all, but we'd like to get it done in that time if possible. Senator Schumer was also asked what amendments from his party can be expected on the budget reconciliation bill.
Senator, can you preview in as much detail as possible the amendments that Democrats plan to offer?
Yeah, we're going to have amendments focused in 5 areas, not exclusively, but focused. One is the cuts to health care. The second is that it raises costs for Americans and at the same time loses lots of jobs. The third is how it gives huge tax cuts for billionaires. The fourth is corruption that the Trump administration's engaged in. And the fifth is the budget deficit. Not the budget deficit per se, as bad as that is, but it raises costs. It's going to raise your cost to buy a car, raise your cost to buy a home, raise your cost for a credit card.
Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, at a news conference. Fox News writes a provision inside President Donald Trump's big, beautiful bill that would have lessened regulations on certain firearms was one of the many stripped policies that did not pass muster with Senate rules. Senate parliamentarian ruled late Thursday night that policy changes that would delist short-barrel rifles, shotguns, and suppressors from the National Firearms Act would have to be scrubbed from the Senate Finance Committee's portion of the mammoth bill. The provision would have allowed for those particular guns and accessories to no longer be subject to a $200 federal tax. And as always, you can follow live gavel-to-gavel coverage of the Senate, even into the weekend, on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and on C-SPAN 2 television. On Wall Street, the Dow up 432, NASDAQ up 105, S&P up 32. From CNBC, President Donald Trump on Friday said the United States is immediately terminating all discussions on trade with Canada in response to Ottawa's decision to impose a digital services tax on American tech firms. Trump's announcement on Truth Social accused Canada of copying the European Union with the egregious tax. He wrote, "We will let Canada know the tariff that they will be paying to do business with the United States over the next 7-day period." And from CNBC, the U.S. and China have confirmed details of a trade framework that seeks to allow rare earth exports and easing of tech restrictions, according to a statement released by China's Ministry of Commerce Friday afternoon. China will review and approve export applications for items subject to export control rules, while the U.S. will correspondingly cancel a range of existing restrictive measures imposed against Beijing, a spokesperson for the ministry said in a statement, without elaborating. And from CNN, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent on Friday said he thinks trade negotiations could be wrapped up by Labor Day, providing a more relaxed framework for inking deals than the previously prescribed July 9th deadline. Washington Today continues in a moment.
In a nation divided, a rare moment of unity. This fall, C-SPAN presents Ceasefire, where the shouting stops and the conversation begins. in a town where partisan fighting prevails. One table, two leaders, one goal, to find common ground. This fall, Ceasefire, on the network that doesn't take sides, only on C-SPAN.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you get your podcasts. Iran's foreign minister writes Reuters indicated on Friday that Tehran may reject any request by the head of the UN nuclear watchdog, IAEA, for visits to Iranian nuclear sites. He wrote on X, IAEA head Rafael Grossi's insistence on visiting the bombed sites under the pretext of safeguards is meaningless and possibly even malign in intent. Iran reserves the right to take any steps in defense of its interests, its people, and its sovereignty. The article says Iran's parliament approved a bill on Wednesday to suspend cooperation with the IAEA. The move followed an air war with Israel in which Iran's longtime enemy said it wanted to prevent Tehran from developing a nuclear weapon, which led to U.S. forces striking 3 Iranian nuclear sites. That was from Reuters. In Washington, U.S. House members today received a classified briefing from the Trump administration about the bombings that followed a briefing to U.S. senators on Thursday. The briefers were Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, CIA Director John Radcliffe, and General Dan Kane, Chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Some members came out after to speak with reporters. Here's the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, Republican of Louisiana.
Let me give you some thoughts about what just transpired in there this morning. We talked about how historic and fateful these moments are. This is a historic time that we live in, and this has been an incredible 2 weeks. Of course, it began with Israel's strikes that were targeted against Iran's nuclear and ballistic missile programs. They eliminated nearly the entire top echelon of Iran's military command and nuclear scientists. And then, of course, this past weekend, the United States acted as we needed to act. And we had our military forces, of course, strike the heart of Iran's nuclear weapons program. We delivered a major setback that resulted then in a feeble face-saving response from Iran, and immediately thereafter a ceasefire agreement. We want to commend President Trump for his decisive and bold leadership, and thank our military intelligence and diplomatic professionals for what they've accomplished. It is a true testament to America's leadership and military strength. And I will tell you, I was heartened by the briefing that we just got here and the reaction by all of our colleagues. It was bipartisan. There were Republicans and Democrats there. There was a couple of moments of rousing applause in support for our outstanding, extraordinary military servicemen and women. The pride that we all have as Americans, as the only nation on the face of the planet that is capable of this kind of decisive action. And again, as I said, it takes bold leadership to do so. The briefing today was thorough, I think very helpful for the members. They relayed very important information and answered a lot of the questions that were in the minds of members of the House here, and I know they did the same in the Senate yesterday. So we are blessed to be led by a cabinet of officials who are so good at their jobs, to have the acumen of an extraordinary chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Kane, and all of the personnel that work there at the Pentagon and in the U.S. military. I'm very proud to be an American today. I think everyone should be. And what I will say next, and what we expect, and one of the things that was discussed this morning, is that we now need Iran to engage with us in direct, good faith talks, negotiations, not through third parties, not through other countries. They need to sit down at the table with us and ensure that this peace is truly lasting. We're on the verge of a real peace in the Middle East for the first time in a long time. And that's because of the decisive leadership of the United States. Everyone around the world understands that. The president got a fantastic reception, as you know, at the NATO meeting, at the summit. And it is so encouraging to us that for the first time now, the other countries, NATO partners, are agreeing to commit 5% of their GDP to the fund to defend the peace around the world. The American people, American taxpayers cannot be leaned upon to carry everyone else any longer. We have to have and pursue an America First policy, and that means what is in America's interest. Of course, what has been done here was not just in America's interest, but in the interest of all peace-loving people and free people around the world.
House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican of Louisiana, speaking to reporters outside the classified briefing on the U.S. strikes on Iran's nuclear sites. Also coming out, Congressman Jason Crow, Democrat from Colorado.
It's really important that the United States Congress is the body that authorizes offensive military action and has matters over war. There's no doubt that the president has self-defense authority, but that threshold, in my mind, has not been met. Right? There has to be an imminent risk against U.S. persons and U.S. facilities in order for the president to do this without congressional authorization. And what was briefed to Congress today is massively different than what has been told to Congress over the last year, up until a month ago, about both Iranian capabilities and Iranian intent.
Are you convinced that Iran's nuclear facilities have been completely destroyed, obliterated, whatever the administration is using?
No, I'm not convinced of that whatsoever. Numerous words have been used. In fact, they said, pick your adjective. Well, adjectives and words actually matter. They have different meanings, and they mean vastly different things, and they have not actually settled on a definition in what they claim the results of the strike were. So we'd like to see that. We've been told that there are still additional reports that have not been provided to Congress. So show the report. With a real battle damage assessment, please stand up so we can make that assessment and see what the results were. But I just want to underscore the fact that military success, even if it happened, does not make it okay for them to violate the Constitution and not seek congressional authorization. And the reason is some missions are successful and some are not. But it's the United States Congress that has the authority to determine when to take offensive military action, not the president.
What about the topic of the DNI leak? Did that come up at all? And some people have insinuated that it could have came from Congress. What's your reaction?
I have no information about where it would have come from. I think that's massive conjecture that it came from Congress. It very well may have, but there's been bipartisan and resounding condemnation of that. Any leak is unacceptable. Whether it's President Trump keeping classified documents in his bathroom or Secretary Hegseth putting classified operational war plans on Signal, it's never okay, and certainly not in this instance either.
Congressman Jason Crow, Democrat from Colorado, speaking to reporters outside the classified briefing from the Trump administration officials on the U.S. strikes on Iran's nuclear sites. CBS News writes that the Senate is expected to vote Friday on whether to block President Trump from using further military force against Iran, as Democratic anger festers over the lack of details from the administration about the recent strikes on the country's nuclear facilities. Democratic Senator Tim Kaine of Virginia introduced the War Powers Resolution days before the U.S. bombed 3 locations central to Iran's nuclear program, seeking to force the president to get congressional authorization before entering the conflict between Israel and Iran. That was from CBS News. President Trump was questioned today at a White House news conference about Iran after the U.S. bombing of their facilities.
Are you concerned at all about secret nuclear sites in Iran? You talked about maybe just
secret nuclear sites?
Yes, that there might be some.
Not really. Can I tell you, they're exhausted, and Israel's exhausted too. And I dealt with both of them, and they both wanted it settled, both of them, and we did a great job. But they're exhausted. The last thing they're thinking about right now is nuclear. You know what they're thinking of? They're thinking about tomorrow, trying to live. It's such a mess. It's such a mess. The place was bombed to hell. And no, I'm not worried about it at all. And I'm putting out a little statement. I'm going to respond to the Ayatollah's statement yesterday that we won the war. Oh, God, we won the war. And I said, look, you're a man of great faith, a man who's highly respected in this country. You have to tell the truth. You got beat to hell. And Israel was beat up too. They were both beat up, and it was a great time to end it. It was quick. They got the hate out. There was a lot of hate, a lot of hate. It would be great if they didn't have that hate, but the last thing they're thinking about is nuclear weapons right now.
President Donald Trump in the White House briefing room. Another reporter asked him if he would consider bombing Iran again if U.S. intelligence determines that Iran has again reached a concerning point in uranium enrichment capability. The president responded, sure, without question, absolutely. Story from BBC News. Iranian authorities have carried out a wave of arrests and multiple executions of people suspected of links to Israeli intelligence agencies in the wake of the recent war between the two countries. It comes after what officials described as an unprecedented infiltration of Iranian security services by Israeli agents, reporting from BBC News. This is Washington Today, and from Associated Press, the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda on Friday signed a peace deal facilitated by the U.S. to help end the decades-long deadly fighting in eastern Congo, while helping the U.S. government and American companies gain access to critical minerals in the region. Secretary of State Marco Rubio was at the signing ceremony at the State Department in Washington with the foreign ministers of the two countries.
This is, an important moment after 30 years of war. President Trump is a president of peace. He really does want peace. He prioritizes it above all else. We saw his intervention in the conflict between India and Pakistan. We saw his intervention most recently as a few days ago in a very dangerous war, right? A very dangerous war that could have really spiraled out of control, and his intervention made that possible. And there are other places that we want to see this, but we're very excited about this, and we can't wait to have the heads of state, the presidents of the respective countries here in Washington in a few weeks to finalize the complete protocol and agreement, but today is an important step in that direction, and we're grateful to be able to host it here at the Department of State. And just thinking, we think sometimes about peace. It's not just about ending wars, it's not just about saving lives, it's about allowing people to live. It's about allowing people to now have dreams and hopes for a better life, for prosperity, for economic opportunity, for a family reunification, for all the things that make life worth living. Those things become impossible when there's war and when there's conflict. So we're grateful to have played the role we've played. We acknowledge and recognize there's still more work to be done. But we thank you all very much for being a part of this historic and important day. This is really why I wanted this job, or why I embraced this job so much, is moments like this. This is, in essence, the Department of State is really the Department of Peace. It's designed to bring people together, both in our relations with other countries, but to the extent we can use the stature and the influence of the United States to bring others together. It makes the world a better place. And I honestly believe that when there's peace in the world among friends who may have disagreements and conflict, it does help America. It does help make America stronger and safer and more prosperous. It gives us partners we can do business with. And partners that we can work with to address insecurity and threats to our national security and to our collective national security. So we are grateful to both of you. I know how hard this was and how much work went into it, and we know there's more work to be done. But we are grateful to have you here today. We're honored to be a part of this. We're excited to be a part of it. And again, I do want to thank everyone here in our Africa Bureau and at the Department of State. And once again, our superstar there, Mr. Bulos. What do you want to do next after you're done with this? Sudan. Yeah, very important. Actually, very, very important. And you're very involved in that as well. So what are you guys doing this week in Qatar? You guys want to work a little? We are grateful to all of you. Thank you. Thank you.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio at the State Department, sitting beside the foreign ministers of Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo. After the signing of the peace agreement, they all met with President Trump in the White House Oval Office. More from the Associated Press story. The deal has been touted as an important step toward peace in the Central African nation of Congo, where conflict with more than 100 armed groups, the most potent, backed by Rwanda, has killed millions since the 1990s. It's also at the heart of President Trump's push to gain access to critical minerals needed for much of the world's technology at a time when the U.S. and China are actively competing for influence in Africa. Story from the Daily Signal. Despite overwhelming opposition from Democrats, the House voted Friday to adopt House Resolution 516, condemning the violent June 2025 protests in Los Angeles. The vote tally was 215 to 195, with all 195 votes against coming from Democrats. No Republicans voted against the bill, and 7 Democrats crossed party lines to join the 208 Republicans who voted in favor. That was from the Daily Signal. The sponsor of the resolution, Congresswoman Youngkin, Republican of California, urged passage in a House floor speech.
Peaceful protests are a constitutional right. We all cherish that, and our communities should not be living in fear. But peaceful protests and freedom of assembly gave way to chaos in Los Angeles we witnessed a few weeks ago. We saw acts of arson, looting, property destruction, vandalism, blocking streets and highways, lighting cars on fire, shooting fireworks, throwing rocks at law enforcement vehicles, and even assaulting federal and local police officers. As a result, we saw more than 500 rioters were arrested, and at least a dozen LAPD officers were injured. Local and state leadership clearly could not contain the chaos. The riots have cost at least $30 million to pay overtime and repair property damages to city buildings. This doesn't include the small businesses and other private entities whose businesses fell victim to the destruction. We also know that the riots were enabled by California's soft-on-crime policies that have allowed for lawlessness and endangered public safety. Again, this resolution recognizes the right to assemble and protest peacefully, condemns the violence against law enforcement, and calls on local and state officers to work with the federal government to restore peace. And we want to thank our law enforcement. This is not controversial.
Congresswoman Youngkin, Republican of California, on the House floor. Congresswoman Judy Chu, Democrat of California, spoke against the resolution.
I rise in opposition to this extremely partisan resolution that seeks to legitimize President Trump's baseless attacks in Los Angeles and on our elected leaders, including Governor Newsom and Mayor Bass. This administration's mass ICE raids by masked agents that will not identify themselves have trampled on our rights and left our community shaken, but not defeated. The president manufactured a crisis in Los Angeles and then blamed our constituents for it. He induced ICE to terrorize our community, detaining hundreds of hardworking residents at places like Home Depot and car washes, including U.S. citizens like Job Garcia, a doctoral student in my district, the Claremont Graduate University, who was manhandled, thrown to the ground, and handcuffed. And for this, the president called in the National Guard and Marines? This resolution only gives credence to Trump's dangerous rhetoric. Instead, we should be considering the resolution introduced by California's Democratic delegation, which condemns anyone engaged in violation of the law, violence, or vandalism, but most importantly, stands up for our constitutional rights to due process and free expression, and shows our appreciation to local law enforcement for upholding public safety. Rather than feed into the president's cruelty, we are standing up for the communities we were elected to represent.
Congresswoman Judy Chu, Democrat of California, on the House floor. The House passed this resolution 215 to 208, 7 Democrats joining the Republicans in voting yes. Jim Acosta and Adam Gray of California, Lauren Gillen and Tom Suozzi of New York, Henry Cuellar of Texas, Don Davis of North Carolina, and Jared Golden of Maine. Story from NBC News. California Governor Gavin Newsom filed a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against Fox News on Friday, accusing host Jesse Waters of defamation by falsely claiming that Newsom had lied about a phone call with President Donald Trump during a dispute over the use of the National Guard in Los Angeles. The lawsuit, seeking more than $787 million and filed in Delaware Superior Court, claims that Fox operates as a propaganda machine for President Trump's radical right-wing agenda, citing the nearly $800 million settlement the network reached with Dominion Voting Systems in 2023 over its coverage of the 2020 election, which Trump lost. That was from NBC News. Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin, a Republican, spoke today at the Faith and Freedom Coalition conference in Washington about the Republican agenda in his state and nationwide, and he also touched on the Virginia governor's race happening this year.
My beloved Virginia is in the middle of a most important election today. I know everybody has their eyes on the midterms, but all eyes should be on Virginia. All eyes, because we have in Virginia the most important race in America. We have Winsome Earle-Sears as our standard bearer. She's a Christian. She's a Marine. She's a small business owner. And she knows how to lead. She has been my partner in turning Virginia from one of those states that was far behind to a winning state, a state that has seen more jobs growth in Virginia than its history, more businesses investing than ever in its history, a 20-year reduction in murder rate, empowering parents, running surplus after surplus after surplus, and providing $9 billion in tax relief to Virginians. Virginia has gone from the back to the front, and she's running against someone who is pretending to be a moderate, a left, liberal, progressive who voted all the time with Nancy Pelosi. This is the moment, and therefore my call to action today is to all of you: help us. Help Winsome Earle-Sears become the 75th governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia. Help us. Help us plant the flag of faith and family and freedom again firmly in Virginia's great soil. This is this year's battle. We have to keep fighting, and if we keep fighting, we will keep winning.
Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin, a Republican at the Faith and Freedom Coalition Conference in Washington. A Roanoke College poll on the Virginia governor's race from mid-May has Democrat Abigail Spanberger leading Republican Winsome Earle-Sears 43% to 26%. Weighted margin of error is 5.25%, and the poll notes that 28% of registered voters are undecided, and 3% said they would vote for somebody else. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter Word for Word. We'll send you the stories making headlines in Washington every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night and weekend.